Dust settled on Main Street as laughter erupted from the saloon. Three men stumbled out, dragging something small between them. In the harsh afternoon light, their burden became clear, a trembling child no more than 5 years old. "Double or nothing," he cries, before hitting dirt, one shouted, hurling the boy into the street. From the shadows, a tall figure watched, weathered face tightening beneath a wide-brim hat. Broken Wing had seen much cruelty in his 50 winters, but this town's casual brutality toward the innocent tested even his weary resolve. His hand moved to the knife at his belt as the child's whimpers reached his ears. Could one Apache warrior truly change the heart of a town built on such callous disregard? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Redemption wasn't always a town that forgot its name. Founded by hopeful settlers who'd survived Apache raids and cavalry conflicts, it began with honest ambition. Now, 10 years later, hope had soured to indifference. The town's single church stood empty most days, its white paint peeling like abandoned prayers. Sheriff Miller wore his tarnished badge like a license for selective justice. He leaned against the jailhouse, chewing tobacco and watching the commotion outside the Red Stallion saloon without interest. He'd long ago decided which battles were worth fighting, and the fate of one nameless orphan wasn't among them. Inside the saloon, Jackson Edwards counted the day's earnings. The Red Stallion's owner had built his fortune on the twin pillars of whiskey and weakness. A shrewd businessman, he'd learned that men parted with money more freely when their dignity was already spent. His establishment offered cards, women, and the pleasure of watching others fall further than yourself. The boy they'd thrown, Thomas, though few bothered with his name, was just another prop in their entertainments. His father had died owing Jackson money, and frontier justice made the debt transferable to the son. Broken Wing observed the town from its edges, where he'd camped these past 2 months. The Apache warrior had come to redemption following rumors of a medicine man who bridged the white and native worlds. Instead, he'd found only another settlement bloated with the same disease he'd witnessed consume a dozen others. He'd lost his family to a cavalry attack 5 winters ago. His wife, son, and the life they'd built, reduced to smoke and memory in a single morning. The few survivors from his band had scattered, some to reservations, others at the mountains. Broken Wing chose solitude, living between worlds, trading pelts and tracking skills for minimal supplies. Sarah Jensen, the widow who ran the boarding house, was one of the few who treated him with basic dignity. She'd lost her husband to Apache arrows years ago, but blamed the bottle that had made him reckless enough to wander into disputed territory alone. She nodded to Broken Wing when they crossed paths, and once had tended a festering wound on his arm without question. Dr. Henderson was another exception in Redemption's landscape of indifference. The physician had arrived with ideals, but found them eroded by the endless parade of bullet wounds, broken bones from drunken falls, and the occasional beaten woman or child. He'd learned to treat the injuries without judging their causes, the only way to survive in a town determined to destroy itself. His own remedy came from the same bottles that created half his patients. The general store, blacksmith, and scattered homesteads completed Redemption's landscape. Most residents simply endured, keeping their heads down and morals flexible. They'd witnessed enough cruelty to become numb to it, a necessary adaptation to frontier life. Thomas wasn't the only orphan in Redemption. A handful of children lived in similar circumstances, working off inherited debts or simply because no one claimed responsibility for them. They cleaned spittoons, delivered messages, and learned early that survival meant becoming invisible when not useful. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dirt street, Broken Wing felt the weight of his knife at his belt. The child's cries had stopped, but the warrior's thoughts had not. In his 50 years, he'd fought against cavalry, hostile tribes, and the relentless march of white settlement. But the battle forming in his mind now was different, one man against the casual cruelty that had become as natural as breathing in Redemption. His people believed that children were sacred gifts, their spirits still fresh from the Creator's world. To harm a child was to poison your own future. As he watched Thomas limping back toward the saloon's rear entrance, Broken Wing's weathered face revealed nothing of the storm brewing behind his dark eyes. The next morning arrived with the same dusty indifference that greeted most days in redemption. Broken Wing had slept little, his dreams filled with memories of his own son. By dawn, he'd made his decision. He moved through town like a shadow, observing. Thomas appeared briefly emptying slop buckets behind the saloon. The boy's movements were efficient but cautious, like a small animal accustomed to predators. Fresh bruises colored his thin arms. Broken Wing remembered the first time he'd noticed the child. 3 weeks earlier, Thomas had been attempting to sweep the boardwalk with a broom nearly twice his height, while balancing on a splintered ankle. No one passing by had acknowledged him. Midday brought the same 3 men from yesterday back to the Red Stallion's swinging doors. They were railroad workers with pockets full of monthly wages and minds empty of purpose beyond spending it. Broken Wing positioned himself across the street, waiting. It didn't take long. Their voices came first, then Thomas stumbling ahead of them onto the boardwalk. "Boy moves quicker today," laughed the tallest one, a man with a rust-colored beard. "I reckon he remembers yesterday's lesson. $10 says I can make him run to the water trough and back before you count to 20, said another, already reaching for his wallet. Broken Wing stepped from the shadows and crossed the street. His moccasins made no sound in the dirt, but something, perhaps the sudden quiet from onlookers, made the men turn. "What's this?" "The local Injuns come to watch the fun," said Beard, hand casually moving toward his pistol. Broken Wing stopped directly between them and Thomas. He stood a head taller than the tallest of them, his body lean but powerful, gray streaked his long black hair, and scars mapped a lifetime of conflicts across his face and arms. "The boy is not for your amusement," he said, his English accented but clear. For a moment, shock silenced the men. Indians seldom addressed white men directly in redemption, and never with such authority. "Hell he ain't," recovered the third man, the youngest of the group. "Edwards rents him out fair and square." "Children are not for renting," Broken Wing replied. A small crowd had gathered now. From the corner of his eye, Broken Wing saw Sarah Jensen stop sweeping her boarding house steps to watch. Dr. Henderson emerged from his office across the street. "Listen here, Injun." Beard stepped forward, whiskey courage in his stance. "This ain't your business, and that ain't your boy." "He is no one's boy," Broken Wing said. "He is a child. He's property to settle a debt," came a new voice. Jackson Edwards pushed through the gathering crowd, Sheriff Miller half a step behind him. "His father died owing me $200. Boy works it off or goes hungry. Simple frontier economics." Miller's hand rested on his holstered pistol. "Move along, Broken Wing. Town ordinance says Indians clear the streets by sundown anyway." "It's barely noon, Sheriff," Dr. Henderson called out. "Law's the law when I say it is, Doc." Miller replied without taking his eyes off Broken Wing. What happened next occurred so quickly that witnesses later disagreed on the sequence. Broken Wing knelt before Thomas, who flinched but didn't run. The warrior removed a small leather pouch from around his neck and gently placed it over the boy's head. "By the ways of my people, I claim this child as under my protection," he announced, loud enough for all to hear. His hand rested briefly on Thomas's head in a gesture both blessing and claim. "Any man who harms him answers to me. That's kidnapping." Edwards sputtered, face reddening. "That's horse shit is what it is," added Beard, drawing his pistol. Sheriff Miller stepped between them. "That's enough. Injun, you've got no rights to claim anything or anyone in this town. I claim what your laws have abandoned," Broken Wing replied, rising to his full height. He looked down at Thomas. "Will you come with me, boy?" The child's eyes darted between the men who had tormented him, and this strange man offering escape. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "This is robbery," Edwards protested, as Broken Wing took Thomas's small hand in his own. "Send your bill to the cavalry that took everything I owned," Broken Wing answered, then turned and walked away, the boy matching 3 steps to each of his long strides. Sheriff Miller drew his pistol, but hesitated as Dr. Henderson moved to stand beside him. "Think carefully, Sheriff," the doctor murmured. "Shooting an Indian in the back while he's holding a child's hand won't play well, even in redemption." As they reached the edge of town, Thomas looked up at the warrior. "Are you stealing me, mister?" "No," Broken Wing answered. "I am returning you." Broken Wing's camp lay a mile outside town, nestled in a shallow canyon where a small spring provided clean water. Simple and sparse, it contained only what a man accustomed to movement required: a lean-to shelter, small fire pit, and carefully arranged tools. Thomas followed silently, occasionally glancing back toward redemption. Whether looking for pursuers or contemplating escape, Broken Wing couldn't tell. The boy flinched when the warrior gestured toward a smooth stone near the fire pit. "Sit," Broken Wing said, softening his voice. "Are you hungry?" Thomas nodded, but remained standing, his thin shoulders tense. "I will not harm you," Broken Wing added, crouching to kindle the fire. "You may run if you wish. Town is that way." He pointed east, without looking up. The boy didn't move, either from fear or calculation. Finally, he perched on the edge of the stone, ready to bolt. Broken Wing set a small pot of beans to warm and sliced venison jerky with his knife. Thomas watched the blade's movements warily. "What's your name, boy?" Broken Wing asked, though he'd heard it called in town. "Thomas," came the whispered reply after a long pause. "Are you really an Indian?" Broken Wing's weathered face creased slightly at the corners of his eyes. "I am Apache. My people call me Broken Wing." "Because your arm got broke?" Thomas asked, eyeing the warrior's left arm, which indeed bore the slight angle of an old fracture. "Because I once tried to fly from a cliff as a boy," Broken Wing answered. "My father said I had courage but needed wisdom to match it." Thomas absorbed this, relaxing slightly. "The men at the saloon said Indians scalp people. Some have, some white men have done worse." Broken Wing handed the boy a tin cup of beans. "Eat." Thomas fell upon the food with desperate efficiency, clearly accustomed to having meals snatched away. When finished, he ran a finger round the cup to capture every morsel. "How long did you work for the saloon man?" Broken Wing asked. "Since forever," Thomas replied. "My pa died when I was little." "How old are you now?" Thomas shrugged. "Mr. Edwards says 7 or 8. "Don't rightly know." Broken Wing nodded. The boy was small for either age, stunted by poor nourishment and hard labor. "They will come for you," he said matter-of-factly. "Not because they want you back, but because I took you." "You gonna give me back?" Alarm flickered across the boy's face. "No." Broken Wing reached into a leather saddlebag and withdrew a small object. "But you should understand the risk." Thomas studied the warrior's face, looking for deception. Finding none, he relaxed slightly. "Why'd you take me anyway?" Broken Wing was silent a long moment. "My son was your age, and the blue coats came," he finally said. "I could not save him. Perhaps I can save you." He extended his hand, revealing a small flute carved from cedar wood, polished by years of handling. This was his. "Do you know music?" Thomas shook his head, reaching hesitantly for the instrument. "I will tell you," Broken Wing said. "First lesson, how to hold it without fear." The boy took the flute, turning it carefully in his small hands. His touch was gentle, betraying a natural care that years of rough treatment hadn't erased. "I don't know how to be an Indian," Thomas whispered. "I am not asking you to be Apache," Broken Wing replied. "Only to be a boy again." As dusk deepened around them, Broken Wing showed Thomas how to produce a single clear note from the flute. The sound wavered across the darkening canyon, startling a pair of ravens into flight. "Good," Broken Wing nodded. "Tomorrow we will try another note. Now sleep." He gestured to a pile of soft hides, arranged beneath the lean-to. "What if they come while I'm sleeping?" Thomas asked, fear returning to his voice. Broken Wing settled himself against a boulder facing the path from town, rifle across his knees. "Then they will find me awake." The boy curled beneath the hides, still clutching the cedar flute. Broken Wing watched as exhaustion gradually overcame weariness. When Thomas finally slept, his face softened, years of tension melting away to reveal the child beneath. Broken Wing remained motionless, listening to the night sounds and the boy's even breathing. His decision had set something irrevocable in motion. Whether wisdom or foolishness, it was too late to change course now. Sheriff Miller slammed his fist against the table in the town council room, rattling the oil lamp. This ain't just about some worthless orphan. We let an Indian walk off with a white child in broad daylight. What's next? The hastily convened meeting had drawn Redemption's influential citizens, Jackson Edwards from the saloon, Herbert Taylor, who owned the general store, Judge Wallace, who visited monthly from the county seat, and Reverend Phillips, whose Sunday sermons attracted barely a dozen faithful. It's kidnapping, plain and simple, Edwards insisted, fingering his gold watch chain. That boy represents a substantial investment. Investment? Sarah Jensen spoke from the back where the women were permitted to observe but rarely comment. He's a child who was being used as gambling entertainment. Mind your place, Mrs. Jensen, Judge Wallace cautioned. The legal matter is clear. Indians have no standing to claim guardianship of white children. Dr. Henderson cleared his throat. Perhaps we should consider the boy's welfare in this discussion. His welfare was secured through honest employment, Edwards countered. Better than starving, which is what his drunkard father left him to do. The doctor reached into his worn leather satchel and removed a small note. I've treated Thomas 8 times in the past year. Broken fingers, burn marks, lacerations consistent with being struck by a belt. Boys get injured, Edwards dismissed with a wave. Especially clumsy one. A posse is the obvious solution, Sheriff Miller interrupted, eager to redirect the conversation. I'll take 6 men, track the Indian, recover the boy and dispense appropriate justice. And by appropriate justice, you mean hanging Broken Wing from the nearest tree? Sarah challenged, standing despite disapproving murmurs. Mrs. Jensen, your sympathy for Indians is well known and barely tolerated, the sheriff replied coldly. Don't push what little patience this town has for a widow with unusual opinion. I'll ride with the posse, volunteered Fletcher, one of the railroad workers who'd been tormenting Thomas. Man needs teaching about respect for property. The boy isn't property, came a new voice. Miss Emily Clayton, the young schoolteacher, spoke from beside Sarah. I tried to convince Miss Edwards to allow Thomas schooling last year. He refused, saying education would make him less useful. Edwards's face darkened. My business arrangements aren't subject to schoolmarm approval. This bickering accomplishes nothing, Judge Wallace declared. Sheriff, organize your posse. If the Indian resists, handle it accordingly. If he surrenders peacefully, bring him back for trial. And the boy, Dr. Henderson pressed, returns to his legal employer, the judge ruled, nodding toward Edwards. As the meeting dispersed, Sarah caught Dr. Henderson's arm. He'll kill that child, one way or another. I know, the doctor muttered, but what can we do? The law's on Edwards's side. The law, Sarah said bitterly, has a funny way of working in Redemption. She slipped away, moving quickly through deepening twilight toward her boarding house. Inside, she grabbed a small bundle she'd prepared earlier and hurried to the back stable where her mare was already saddled. Going somewhere, Mrs. Jensen? Sarah froze at Sheriff Miller's drawl. He stepped from the shadows, thumbs hooked in his belt. Just checking on my horse, she replied evenly. Thought I heard coyotes earlier. Funny time to bring provisions, he observed, nodding at her bundle. Leftover bread for the strays. The sheriff studied her face, then glanced at the saddled horse. Pussy leaves at first light. Any citizen interfering will be considered an accomplice to kidnapping. I understand the law, Sheriff. Because that Indian broke it, and now he'll answer for it. That's how civilization works, Mrs. Jensen, not through bleeding hearts and misplaced sympathy. After he left, Sarah leaned against the stable wall, heart pounding. From a hiding place beneath loose floorboards, she retrieved a small leather journal and added it to her bundle. Her late husband's trail diary contained detailed maps of the surrounding wilderness, places where a man might hide if he knew the land well enough. The clock on the church tower struck 9. The posse wouldn't move until morning, but that gave her precious little time. Sarah mounted her horse and guided it quietly through the back alley, away from curious eyes. As she reached the edge of town, she cast one glance back at Redemption. The saloon windows glowed yellow against the night, laughter spilling into the darkness. The jailhouse lamp burned in the sheriff's office, where he would be planning tomorrow's hunt. Sarah turned her horse toward the canyon, where smoke from a small fire had been visible at sunset. She had chosen her side in this conflict. Now she would have to live with the consequences. Dawn painted the canyon walls amber as Broken Wing roused Thomas. The boy startled awake, momentarily confused by unfamiliar surroundings. "We move soon," Broken Wing explained, already packing his few possessions. "The sheriff will bring men at first light." Thomas rubbed sleep from his eyes. "Where we going?" "Higher ground, safer." Broken Wing handed him pemmican, a mixture of dried meat, berries and fat. "Eat, walking makes a boy hungry." As Thomas ate, Broken Wing knelt beside the spring. From a pouch at his waist, he removed a small stone carving. An eagle, with wings spread in flight. The warrior dipped it into the water, lips moving in silent prayer, then carefully returned it to his pouch. "What's that?" Thomas asked. "Medicine stone. My father carved it when I earned my name." Broken Wing gestured for Thomas to join him. "Water remembers. I thank it for sheltering us." Thomas frowned. "Water can't remember. It's just water." "You speak what they taught you," Broken Wing replied, without judgment. "First lesson, everything has spirit. Water, stone, even that scorpion." He pointed to a small arachnid climbing the canyon wall. "Even bad people like Mr. Edwards," Broken Wing nodded. "His spirit is sick, not absent." The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted their conversation. Broken Wing tensed, reaching for his rifle. "Broken Wing?" A woman's voice echoed across the canyon. "Thomas?" "It's the widow lady," Thomas whispered, recognizing Sarah's voice. Broken Wing signaled for silence until he confirmed she was alone. Sarah dismounted, leading her horse up the narrow path. "Sheriff's forming a posse," she said, without preamble. 6 men, leaving at first light." "You risk much coming here," Broken Wing observed. Sarah reached into her saddlebag. "I brought supplies, food, medicine, warm clothes for Thomas." She handed the boy a small bundle. "And this." Thomas unwrapped a hand-carved knife with a bone handle. "It was my son's," Sarah explained. "He'd want you to have it." Broken Wing studied her face. "Why help us?" "Because I've watched that boy sweep the boardwalk with broken fingers," she answered simply. "And because sometimes the law is wrong." She spread a map from her husband's journal on a flat rock. "Miller will expect you to head west toward Apache territory, but there's a trapper's cabin here." She indicated a spot near a mountain stream, abandoned since last winter. "It might give you shelter while things settle." "Nothing will settle," Broken Wing said. "They cannot allow what I've done to stand." "Then what's your plan?" Sarah demanded. "Keep running forever?" Broken Wing looked at Thomas, who was cautiously testing his new knife against a stick. "The boy deserves better than life as a fugitive." "Then return to town with me," Sarah urged. "Some people will support you. Dr. Henderson, Miss Clayton from the school, and many more will not." The debate was interrupted by Thomas's excited exclamation. He had successfully whittled a crude but recognizable arrowhead. "Look," he held it up proudly. "Like real Indians make." Broken Wing examined it gravely. "Good. First attempt. Tomorrow you will make better one." "There might not be a tomorrow if you stay here," Sarah warned. "At least let me take Thomas somewhere safe." The boy shrank back. "I ain't going back." "No one will force you, Thomas," Sarah assured him. "I stay with him," Thomas declared, moving closer to Broken Wing. "He gave me a flute and doesn't hit me." Sarah's expression softened. "You've made an impression." Broken Wing nodded. "We will go to the cabin. If they follow, the mountains offer many places to disappear." "And after?" Sarah pressed. "Winter comes early in the high country. 1 day at a time," Broken Wing replied. Second lesson, he added, glancing at Thomas. Sarah gathered her things reluctantly. I'll try to slow them down, send word when I can. As she mounted her horse, Thomas ran forward. Thank you for the knife, ma'am. She smiled down at him. Keep it close, and keep practicing those arrowheads. After Sarah departed, Broken Wing and Thomas moved efficiently, covering their camp and preparing to travel. The warrior showed the boy how to walk without leaving obvious tracks, stepping on stone where possible. Why are you teaching me Indian stuff? Thomas asked, as they climbed a steep trail. Apache ways kept my people alive for many generations, Broken Wing answered. They will keep you alive now. Thomas clutched his new knife, determination replacing fear on his young face. I'll learn good. You'll see. I know, Broken Wing replied, an unfamiliar warmth spreading in his chest. You already are. By midday, the terrain had grown steeper and more challenging. Thomas struggled to keep pace, his thin legs unused to mountain travel. Broken Wing adjusted his stride accordingly, stopping occasionally to point out landmarks or teach small lessons. See these tracks? He asked, indicating faint impressions in the soil. Deer passed here before dawn. 2 adults. 1 young one. Thomas studied the marks dubiously. How can you tell? The weight and shape tell stories if you learn to read them. Broken Wing guided the boy's finger along one impression. Feel the edge here. Still sharp. If made yesterday, rain would have softened it. Can you read my tracks too? Easily. You walk heel first like town people. Makes loud noise, leaves deep print. Thomas immediately attempted to modify his gait, placing the ball of his foot down first as he'd observed Broken Wing doing. The warrior nodded approval. Third lesson. Move like water, over stone, quiet, smooth. Their path took them higher into pine-covered slopes. Thomas marveled at towering trees and startled when a grouse burst from underbrush nearby. So many birds up here, he commented, watching it disappear into the forest. More animals than people, Broken Wing confirmed. Safer that way. When they stopped to rest by a narrow stream, Broken Wing produced a small tin cup from his pack. Unlike his other possessions, handcrafted from natural materials, this was clearly of white manufacture, dented and discolored from years of use. Drink, he instructed, filling it with clear water. Small sips. Mountain water is strong medicine. As Thomas drank, Broken Wing surveyed the valley below, scanning for dust clouds that would betray the posse's movement. Nothing yet, but they would come. Did you always live in the mountains? Thomas asked, returning the cup. My people moved with the season, valleys in winter, high country in summer. Broken Wing's expression remained neutral, but his voice carried the weight of memory. Before the reservations, what's reservations? Places where they put Indians who surrender. Broken Wing tucked the cup away. Small pieces of bad land, where people wait to die. Thomas absorbed this solemnly. Is that why you live alone? I chose freedom over captivity. Broken Wing stood, signaling their rest was over. As did you. By late afternoon, dark clouds gathered over distant peaks. Broken Wing quickened their pace, following game trails that zigzagged upward through increasingly rocky terrain. Thomas stumbled occasionally, but pressed on without complaint, a resilience that did not go unnoticed. There, Broken Wing finally pointed toward a ridge ahead. Cabin is just beyond. How much further? Thomas panted, exhaustion evident. Not far. You have walked well today. The boy straightened at the rare praise. I ain't tired. A faint smile crossed Broken Wing's face. Brave words. Truth is also brave. Thomas considered this, maybe a little tired. The first raindrops fell as they crested the ridge. Below, nestled against a granite outcropping, stood a crude log cabin. Its roof sagged slightly, but the structure appeared sound. We shelter there tonight, Broken Wing decided. Rain will cover our tracks. Inside, the cabin retained the musty smell of long abandonment. A simple stone fireplace dominated one wall. Rusted traps and tools hung from pegs, testimony to the former occupant's trade. A rough-hewn table stood beneath the room's single window, and a narrow cot occupied one corner. Broken Wing efficiently assessed their sanctuary, checking the chimney for blockages before starting a small fire. Thomas explored cautiously, lifting the lid of an old trunk near the cot. "Look," he exclaimed, withdrawing a peculiar object. "What's this?" It was a compass, its brass case tarnished green with age. Despite years of neglect, the needle still swung freely, seeking north. Broken Wing took it gently. White man's tool for finding direction. Does it work by magic? By understanding the Earth's power? Broken Wing placed it on the table and pointed. The needle always seeks the great star. White men call it north. Thunder rumbled outside as rain intensified, drumming against the cabin's roof. Thomas yawned, despite his efforts to appear alert. "Sleep," Broken Wing instructed, gesturing toward the cot. "I will keep watch." The boy hesitated. "What if the sheriff finds us? Rain speaks too loudly for men to follow tracks tonight." Broken Wing checked his rifle and positioned himself near the door. "Tomorrow is soon enough for such worries." Thomas nodded, curling onto the cot without further protest. Within minutes his breathing deepened into sleep. Broken Wing watched the boy's chest rise and fall in the firelight. Then he turned his attention to the compass, its needle trembling slightly, but maintaining its unwavering focus northward. Direction, he reflected, was the one thing the white man's world and his shared, the understanding that to survive, one must know precisely where one stands and where one is headed. Dawn broke with lingering mist, clinging to pine branches. Broken Wing had allowed Thomas to sleep while he maintained vigilance, ears attuned to sounds beyond the cabin's walls. The rain had stopped hours ago, leaving behind the fresh scent of wet earth and stone. A soft crunch of pine needles outside brought Broken Wing instantly alert. He motioned for Thomas to remain silent as he moved to the window, rifle ready. "I know you're in there, Broken Wing," called a gravelly voice. "It's Joseph. I'm coming in slow." Broken Wing relaxed slightly, but kept his rifle positioned. "Enter." The door creaked open to reveal a bearded white man in buckskins, silver-streaked hair pulled back in a style more Apache than settler. He carried a deer haunch over one shoulder and wore a battered cavalry pistol on his hip. "Thought I might find you here," Joseph Blackthorne said, eyeing Thomas with curiosity. "Word travels even in the backcountry. Heard you'd stolen yourself a child." "Rescued," Broken Wing corrected. "This is Thomas." Joseph nodded to the boy. "Pleased to meet you, young man." Joseph Blackthorne, formerly of Kentucky, presently of nowhere in particular. Thomas stared wide-eyed at this strange hybrid of white man and mountain dweller. "The posse?" Broken Wing asked. "Camped 5 miles south," Joseph confirmed. "Setting down the venison. 6 men, including that jackass sheriff. They're following your trail, but that rainstorm slowed them considerably." He grinned. "Plus, they might have been misdirected by some confusing tracks heading east." Broken Wing's expression remained neutral, but his eyes conveyed gratitude. "Your woman is well?" "Morning Star is fine. She sent food and a message. Bring the boy to our place." Joseph sat at the table, producing a clay pipe from his pocket. "It's another day's journey, but safer than this old trap." "We would bring trouble to your door." Joseph shrugged. "Trouble's an old friend of mine. Besides, Morning Star would skin me alive if I didn't offer." He lit his pipe, puffing thoughtfully. "Word is the territorial governor's been notified. They're calling it kidnapping, making it more than local business." Thomas edged closer to Broken Wing. "I ain't going back. Nobody's suggesting it, son," Joseph assured him. "But this situation needs more than just running." While they talked, Thomas noticed a strange object hanging from Joseph's belt, a small leather pouch with intricate beadwork and dangling eagle feathers. "What's that?" he asked, pointing. Joseph untied it and held it out. "My wedding gift from Morning Star's father. It's a striker-light pouch." He opened it to reveal flint steel and tinder. "Apache craftsmanship, 15 years and still the finest fire starter I've owned." Broken Wing nodded. "Her father was known for his beadwork. Morning Star's even better," Joseph said, demonstrating how the flint and steel created sparks. "She makes these for trading now. Settlers pay good money for reliable fire." Thomas watched, fascinated. "Can I try?" "Careful now," Joseph guided his hands. "Strike at an angle, like so." After several attempts, Thomas produced a shower of sparks, his face lighting with accomplishment. "Good," Joseph praised. "Fire is life out here. Neither white nor Apache can survive without it." Broken Wing watched this exchange with thoughtful eyes. After deliberation, he said, We will go to your camp. Joseph nodded. Wise choice. Morning Star will help with the boy, and we can figure out next steps. He glanced at Thomas. Ever ridden a horse, son? Just the dray horses when they wasn't working, Thomas admitted. My gelding's gentle enough. We'll share the saddle until we reach home. While Joseph prepared the horse, Broken Wing took Thomas aside. Joseph walks between two worlds. His wife is Apache, but he maintains connections with white settlements. Their camp is neither fully white nor fully Apache. Is that bad? Thomas asked. It is uncommon, Broken Wing replied, but perhaps what you need. I want to stay with you, Thomas insisted. And I with you. But a boy needs more than one teacher. Broken Wing adjusted the medicine pouch, still hanging around Thomas's neck. Fourth lesson. Wisdom comes from many sources. They departed an hour later, Joseph and Thomas sharing the gelding while Broken Wing walked alongside. Their path took them deeper into the mountains, away from established trails. The posse will check the cabin, Joseph predicted. By then we'll be well hidden. Morning Star's people have used these mountains for centuries. There are places no white man has mapped. Thomas watched how Broken Wing moved through the forest, alert, respectful, reading signs invisible to untrained eyes. The boy straightened his back, trying to mirror the warrior's posture and attention. You're a quick study, Joseph observed quietly. That'll serve you well. I'm learning to be Apache, Thomas declared with childish certainty. Joseph exchanged glances with Broken Wing over the boy's head. You're learning to survive, son. That's something both Apache and white men understand. Redemption's weekly newspaper, the Frontier Chronicle, sat untouched on the counter of Henderson's medical office. The headline declared Indian ABDX child, posse in pursuit. Below it in smaller type, territorial governor notified of Apache aggression. Dr. Henderson scowled at the paper before turning his attention back to the small girl sitting on his examination table. 8-year-old Lucy Simmons clutched a rag doll missing one arm, her own thin wrist bearing the telltale bruising of a harsh grip. Does it hurt when I touch here? He asked gently. She nodded, eyes downcast. Lucy, can you tell me how this happened? Fell down, she whispered, the standard answer he'd heard countless times. Henderson sighed and reached for a jar of salve. As he applied it, Sarah Jensen entered with a basket covered by a checkered cloth. Brought you some lunch, doctor. Her eyes moved meaningfully to Lucy, and some extra for anyone who might need it. Henderson nodded thanks. Lucy's just leaving. Aren't you, dear? The girl slid from the table, still clutching her doll. Where do you stay now, Lucy? Sarah asked casually. Mr. Edwards has me washing dishes since Thomas ran off, she replied. Says I'm lucky to have the work. Sarah exchanged glances with Henderson. Would you like to come help me at the boarding house instead? I could use a girl with good hands. Lucy's eyes widened with hope, then dimmed. Mr. Edwards wouldn't allow it. Let me worry about Mr. Edwards, Sarah said, slipping a warm biscuit into the girl's hand. Come by tomorrow if you can. After Lucy left, Henderson poured coffee for them both. That's the third child this week who's been reassigned to the saloon. Edwards is making examples, Sarah confirmed. Ensuring no one else gets ideas about leaving, Henderson lifted the newspaper. Jameson's done his part spreading the official version. Apache savagery. White child in danger. Not a word about why Thomas might be better off with Broken Wing. Not everyone believes it, Sarah said. Miss Clayton's been asking questions at the school. Several children have mentioned similar arrangements to Thomas's. Henderson sipped his coffee. Sheriff's posse should have caught up to them by now. Unless they had help, Sarah remarked innocently. A knock interrupted them. Reverend Phillips entered, looking uncomfortable in his Sunday suit, despite it being Tuesday. Doctor, Mrs. Jensen, he nodded to each. I wonder if I might have a word. About Lucy Simmons, Henderson asked directly. The Reverend's eyes widened. How did you? You finally noticed the children, Sarah stated. Only took an Apache to make us see what's been happening under our noses. Reverend Phillips fidgeted with his hat brim. I've been reflecting on our Christian duty. The Bible is quite clear about protecting the fatherless. Indeed it is, Sarah agreed. though I recall little action when I brought this to your attention last Easter." The Reverend flushed. "Miss Edwards is a significant contributor to the church building fund, and children are a significant concern of the Almighty," she countered. Henderson interrupted their theological debate. "What brings you here specifically, Reverend?" Phillips reached inside his coat and withdrew a small carved wooden cross on a leather cord. "I found this among the church donations yesterday." Attached was a note requesting prayers for the children of redemption. It was signed by 3 families I wouldn't have expected to be concerned with such matters. "People's consciences work in mysterious ways," Henderson commented. "I'm considering a sermon on our duty to children," Phillips admitted, "and perhaps establishing a proper orphanage. That would require standing against powerful interests," Sarah warned. "I'm aware," the Reverend sighed, "but I cannot shake the image of that Apache man claiming Thomas as his responsibility while we Christians stood by. The shame of it haunts me." Their conversation was interrupted by shouting from the street. Through the window, they saw the newspaper editor, Jameson, arguing with the blacksmith outside the general store. "You weren't there," the blacksmith bellowed. "That Indian didn't kidnap anyone. The boy went willing." "The law says," Jameson began. "The law says whatever Miller and Edwards wanted to say," the blacksmith cut him off. "Print the truth for once, man." Henderson closed the window. "Town's taking sides." "As it should," Sarah declared. "Some evils require choosing." Reverend Phillips clutched the wooden cross. "What happens when the posse returns?" "They'll bring Broken Wing back for trial," Henderson predicted. "If they don't hang him outright." "And Thomas?" Phillips asked. "Back to Edwards," Sarah said grimly. "Unless enough good people finally find their courage." Phillips studied the simple cross in his palm. "Mrs. Jensen, would you help me draft that sermon? I find I need stronger words than my own." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "I believe I would, Reverend." As they talked, Henderson noticed a sheet of paper that had fallen from the newspaper. It was a petition already bearing several signatures, addressed to Judge Wallace. The heading read, "Concerning the welfare of orphaned and indentured children in redemption territory." The doctor smiled faintly. One Apache's defiance had accomplished what years of quiet concern could not. It had forced redemption to confront its own soul. Morningstar's hands moved with practiced efficiency as she braided Thomas's hair. The Apache woman had welcomed the boy without question. 3 days earlier, immediately incorporating him into the rhythms of their hidden camp. "Keep still," she instructed in accented English. "Apache boy must have proper hair." Thomas sat obediently, though his eyes followed Broken Wing and Joseph as they examined a crude map spread across a flat stone nearby. The men spoke in low voices, occasionally glancing toward the valley below. "They found cabin yesterday," Joseph was saying, "split into 2 groups after." Miller and 2 men continued north. Others returned toward town, probably for supplies. Broken Wing nodded. "The sheriff is determined. Man's pride is wounded. Indian outsmarting him doesn't sit well." Joseph traced a route on the map. "If they continue this way, they'll reach the high meadow by tomorrow." "Too close," Broken Wing decided. "We must move camp." Morningstar tied off Thomas's braid with a leather thong. "Boy is doing well, learning quickly." Indeed, Thomas had thrived in these few days. His hollow cheeks had begun filling out with regular meals. He'd learned basic Apache words, helped gather firewood, and watched raptly as Morningstar showed him how to identify edible plants. "Look," Thomas called, running to Broken Wing. "I can make fire now." He demonstrated his new skill, striking flint against steel to shower sparks onto carefully prepared tinder. Within moments, a small flame appeared. "Good," Broken Wing approved. "A man who makes fire will never freeze." Joseph rolled the map and secured it with a leather cord. "You've got a bright student there." Their discussion was interrupted by the sound of a bird call. 3 short whistles followed by 1 long. Joseph immediately tensed. "That's Morningstar's cousin," he explained, reaching for his rifle. "He's keeping watch on the lower trail." Broken Wing moved to the edge of the camp, scanning the forest below. A minute later, an Apache man emerged silently from the trees, bow slung across his back. "Riders," he reported, in his native tongue. "6 horses, soldiers, not the sheriff's men." Joseph translated for Thomas's benefit. "Cavalry patrol. Unusual for them to come this far into the mountains." "The governor," Broken Wing surmised. "He has involved the army." The gravity of this development settled over the camp. Apache conflicts with cavalry had left bitter memories on both sides. If military forces joined the pursuit, the stakes would rise dramatically. Morning Star spoke rapidly to her cousin, who nodded and disappeared back into the forest. "He will watch their movements," she explained. "See if they meet with sheriff's men." Joseph pulled Broken Wing aside. "This changes things. Military involvement means they're treating this as more than a local dispute." Thomas approached, sensing the shift in mood. "Are we leaving?" Broken Wing and Joseph exchanged glances. Finally, Broken Wing knelt to meet Thomas's eyes. "You will stay with Morning Star," he said. "Joseph and I must scout the valley, see how many soldiers, what they plan." Fear flashed across the boy's face. "You're coming back, right?" "Yes," Broken Wing promised. "But we may need to make difficult decisions soon." While Joseph prepared supplies, Morning Star approached with a small object wrapped in soft deerskin. She handed it to Thomas. "For you," she said, "to hold thoughts while we are apart." Thomas unwrapped it carefully, revealing a small stone tablet no larger than his palm. On its surface, Morning Star had etched a simple scene. 2 figures, one tall, one small, standing beside a pine tree. "Is that me and Broken Wing?" Thomas asked, tracing the figures with his finger. Morning Star nodded. "Stone keeps memories safe. When you feel afraid, hold it. Remember, you are not alone." Thomas clutched the stone tablet tightly as he watched Broken Wing and Joseph prepare to leave. The warrior packed lightly, only his knife, rifle and a small pouch of pemmican. "5th lesson," Broken Wing told Thomas. "Sometimes the bravest thing is waiting." The boy nodded solemnly. "I'll practice everything you taught me." "Good. And listen to Morning Star. She is wise in ways I am not." As the men prepared to depart, Thomas suddenly ran to Broken Wing and wrapped his arms around the warrior's waist. The first time he'd initiated such contact. "Come back," he whispered fiercely. Broken Wing rested a hand briefly on the boy's head. "I will return. This I promise." After they disappeared into the forest, Thomas sat beside the fire, stone tablet clutched against his chest. Morning Star gave him space for his thoughts, continuing her work, grinding acorn meal. "Will they be safe?" Thomas finally asked. "Joseph knows these mountains since before you were born," she replied. "And Broken Wing is Apache. They will move like shadows." Thomas nodded, drawing comfort from her certainty. He ran his fingers over the etched figures on the stone tablet, feeling strength flow from the simple image. "Morning Star," he asked after a long silence, "will you teach me more Apache words? I want to surprise Broken Wing when he returns." She smiled, recognizing his request for what it was, an act of faith that the warrior would indeed return. "We begin now," she agreed, with words for family. Redemption slept uneasily under a waning moon. Only the saloon maintained its stubborn brightness, spilling yellow lamplight and drunken laughter into the street. Broken Wing moved between shadows, a ghost returning to the town that had driven him away. Joseph had remained in the foothills, maintaining a way back to Morning Star's camp if retreat became necessary. 3 days of scouting had confirmed their fears. Cavalry patrols had indeed joined the search, making the mountains increasingly dangerous. After much deliberation, Broken Wing had made a decision that surprised even himself, to return to Redemption and confront the situation directly. He slipped behind the boarding house and tapped lightly on the back door. Sarah opened it immediately, as though she'd been waiting. "Thank God," she whispered, ushering him inside. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't come." "The message said urgent," Broken Wing replied, removing his hat. "Thomas is safe, no news of him, which I take as good news." Sarah bolted the door. "But things have changed here. The town is divided, and not quietly." She led him to her small kitchen, where Dr. Henderson and Miss Clayton waited. Both started at his appearance. You took an enormous risk coming here, Henderson said, offering his hand. Broken Wing shook it briefly. Risk was necessary. Cavalry changes everything. That's what we need to discuss, Sarah explained. Judge Wallace arrives tomorrow for the monthly court session. Edwards has filed formal kidnapping charges against you. The territorial governor is sending a representative as well, Miss Clayton added. This case has drawn attention beyond redemption. Broken Wing absorbed this information impassively. Why did you call me back? Henderson slid a folded document across the table. Because of this. Broken Wing opened it carefully. Inside was a legal paper filled with official language, but the heading caught his attention immediately. Petition for review of child welfare practices in redemption territory. 42 signatures, Sarah said proudly, including Reverend Phillips and several prominent business owners. We've documented cases of child mistreatment, Miss Clayton explained. Not just Thomas but Lucy Simmons, the Parker twins, and 6 others, all orphans, all working in conditions that violate territorial law. Even Judge Wallace can't ignore evidence this compelling, Henderson added. But we need Thomas's testimony to solidify the case. Broken Wing's expression hardened. I will not bring the boy back to face Edwards. Edwards may not be in a position to threaten anyone soon, Sarah countered. There's a legal basis for removing all the children from his control. If Henderson emphasized, we can prove systematic abuse and demonstrate a better alternative. What alternative? Broken Wing asked. Miss Clayton stepped forward. The church has offered land for a proper orphanage. Reverend Phillips has had quite a change of heart. From a drawer, Sarah withdrew a cloth-wrapped bundle and placed it on the table. This arrived yesterday from the territorial capital. Broken Wing unwrapped it to reveal an ornate silver medallion on a blue ribbon. Inscribed on its face was Territorial Child Welfare Commission surrounding the territorial seal. Miss Clayton has been appointed Deputy Commissioner, Henderson explained, with authority to investigate and place orphaned children. The governor is responding to pressure from Eastern newspapers, Sarah added. Stories about frontier savagery and neglected white children have embarrassed territorial officials, and one Apache man's action forced them to acknowledge what they've ignored for years, Miss Clayton said quietly. Broken Wing studied the medallion thoughtfully. What do you propose? Come to court tomorrow, Henderson urged. Bring Thomas if possible. We'll present our evidence alongside your testimony. Edwards will still demand the boy's return, Broken Wing pointed out. Let him try, Sarah said fiercely. With the commission's authority and public opinion shifting, he'll find less support than he expected. Their planning was interrupted by urgent knocking at the front door. Sarah motioned everyone to silence as she went to answer. She returned moments later with the blacksmith's apprentice, a lanky youth barely 16. Sheriff's back, the boy reported breathless. Got 3 of his men with him, all liquored up at the saloon. They're saying they'll find the Indian tomorrow and hang him, judge or no judge. Henderson cursed softly. They must have spotted you returning to town. We need to get you out of here, Sarah told Broken Wing. There's a storage cellar beneath the church where you can hide until morning. Broken Wing considered their anxious faces. These people were risking their positions, perhaps their lives, to help him and Thomas. Their courage deserved equal measure from him. No, he decided. No more hiding. I will speak with your judge tomorrow. He gathered the petition papers. These children deserve justice. Thomas deserves justice. It could mean your life, Henderson warned. Broken Wing nodded solemnly. Some things are worth that price. He glanced at the silver medallion still lying on the table. My people had a saying, a warrior dies, a cause lives. Perhaps this cause needs a warrior willing to stand, rather than run. Sarah's eyes glistened with unshed tears. We'll stand with you, sight. Then we prepare, Broken Wing said, settling at the table. Tell me everything I must know about your laws and this judge. If I am to fight in your arena, I must understand its rules. Sheriff Miller paced the length of the jail's single corridor, boots striking the floorboards with unnecessary force. In the first cell, Broken Wing sat cross-legged on the thin mattress, face impassive. The warrior's voluntary surrender at dawn had denied Miller the satisfaction of a manhunt, leaving him irritable and unsettled. Judge Wallace arrives on the noon stage. Miller said, stopping before the cell. Edwards wants a word with you before that. Might make things easier if you tell him where the boy is. Broken Wing's expression remained unchanged. The boy has a name, Thomas. Fine, Thomas. Miller spat the name like something distasteful. Tell Edwards where to find him, and maybe you walk out of here. We both know that is not true, Broken Wing replied calmly. The sheriff's hand tightened on his gun belt. You're facing kidnapping charges. That's hanging offense territory. I saved a child from abuse. Your law should recognize this. Miller laughed without humor. My law's the same for everyone, Indian. Doesn't bend just because you think you know better. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Henderson, medical bag in hand. Judge Wallace telegraphed instructions that the prisoner be examined before the hearing, Henderson explained, already moving toward the cell door. That's irregular, Miller objected. So is an Apache surrendering himself to justice, Henderson countered. Unlock the door, Sheriff, or shall I explain to the judge why his orders weren't followed? Miller reluctantly complied, warning, I'll be right outside. Try anything, and I won't wait for a trial. After the sheriff departed, Henderson opened his bag and withdrew his stethoscope. That was quite an entrance you made this morning. Walking straight up to the jailhouse and surrendering yourself. It was necessary, Broken Wing said simply. How are preparations? In motion. Sarah's coordinating witnesses, Reverend Phillips, is bringing the church council. Henderson checked the warrior's pulse. Edwards is nervous. He's been meeting with his allies all morning. As Henderson continued his examination, he spoke in a low voice about the town's reaction to Broken Wing's return and the coming trial. The information was valuable, though Broken Wing maintained his stoic demeanor. One more thing, Henderson added, reaching deep into his bag. Sarah thought you should have this. The doctor produced a small leather-bound book with worn edges and carefully placed it beneath Broken Wing's thin pillow. The territorial legal code, he explained. She marked sections relevant to your case. Thought you might want to know exactly what you're facing. Thank you, Broken Wing said. And Thomas? Any word? Joseph sent a message. The boy is safe but asking for you. Joseph plans to bring him closer to town tonight, in case his testimony becomes necessary. Their conversation ended as the door opened again. This time Jackson Edwards entered, his usual fine attire replaced by an even more ostentatious suit. The saloon owner dismissed Henderson with a curt nod. I'll need to complete my examination later, Henderson told Broken Wing, loud enough for Edwards to hear. To Edwards, he added, try not to upset my patient. Judge Wallace expects him in good health. After Henderson left, Edwards approached the cell. Unlike Miller's blustering anger, Edwards projected calculated menace. I've built everything in this town from nothing, he began without preamble. The saloon, the hotel, the stage line. My investments created redemption. Broken Wing watched him silently. That gives me certain rights, Edwards continued. Rights your kind wouldn't understand, property rights. The boy's father gambled away his future fair and square. Children are not property, Broken Wing stated. Edwards waved this away impatiently. Territorial law recognizes debt servitude, but that's not why I'm here. He lowered his voice. Tell me where the boy is, and I'll drop the charges. You ride away, I get what's mine, everyone's satisfied. Everyone except Thomas. He'll be fed, clothed, given work, better than most orphans get. Broken Wing's voice remained level. I have seen his scars. A flash of irritation crossed Edwards's face. Discipline is necessary for proper upbringing, as is kindness. Kindness doesn't build frontier towns, Edwards snapped. Then, regaining his composure, my offer stands until the judge arrives. After that, the machinery of justice takes over. And I can't help you. I do not want your help, Broken Wing replied. I want justice for Thomas and the others. Edwards's eyes narrowed. Others? What others? Lucy Simmons, the Parker children, All those you use and discard. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Edwards's face. Who's been talking to you? That school teacher? Jensen woman? Broken Wing remained silent. Edwards leaned closer to the bars. Listen carefully, Indian. This town follows my lead. Always has. Judge Wallace stays at my hotel, drinks my whiskey, and understands how things work out here. Your gallant surrender won't change that. After Edwards stormed out, Broken Wing retrieved the legal book from beneath his pillow. He opened it to where Sarah had marked passages with small strips of paper, running his finger slowly beneath the English words. Outside, the noon stagecoach rumbled into town, bringing Judge Wallace and Undwengly, a reckoning redemption had long avoided. Broken Wing continued reading, preparing for the battle ahead, not with weapons but with the white man's own laws. Judge Harmon Wallace commanded respect merely by entering a room. Tall and lean, with a silver beard trimmed to judicial precision, he had administered frontier justice for 15 years. His reputation for fairness competed with his known pragmatism. He understood that territorial law sometimes bent to accommodate frontier realities. The judge settled into Sheriff Miller's office, converting it to temporary chambers. Before him lay the charging documents against Broken Wing, the petition regarding child welfare, and reports from the cavalry patrols. "Quite a hornet's nest you've stirred up, Sheriff," Wallace remarked, adjusting his spectacles. "Just doing my duty, Your Honor," Miller replied. "Indian kidnapped a white child. Law's clear." "Indeed." Wallace tapped the petition. "Yet 42 citizens seem to think there's more to the story." Edwards, seated beside the sheriff, interjected smoothly. "Misguided sympathies, Judge. Inflamed by sensationalist rumors. Misguided or not, I can't ignore documented allegations of child mistreatment," Wallace said, "especially with the territorial governor's office taking interest." Edwards stiffened. "The governor has more pressing concerns than one runaway boy." "Perhaps," Wallace agreed, "but Eastern newspapers have picked up the story." "Frontier Justice on Trial" was the headline in the St. Louis Dispatch. Outside, redemption hummed with unusual activity. The scheduled court hearing had drawn people from outlying farms and neighboring settlements. The crowd outside the jailhouse grew steadily, divided between those supporting Edwards and those sympathetic to Broken Wing's cause. Sarah Jensen moved through this crowd, distributing small blue ribbons to supporters. Each ribbon bore a single word, stitched in white thread: justice. "Wear it to the hearing," she instructed a farmer's wife. "Let the judge see how many stand for the children." Nearby, Miss Clayton had gathered several women on the church steps. "We need families willing to provide proper homes," she explained. "Temporary placement until the orphanage can be established." Inside the jail, Dr. Henderson completed his examination of Broken Wing. "Judge Wallace will see you in 1 hour," he informed the warrior. "You'll be allowed to speak in your own defense." Broken Wing nodded. "I am prepared." "Joseph sent word," Henderson added in a lower voice. "He and Thomas are camped in the Cottonwood Grove east of town. The boy is eager to see you." A flicker of emotion crossed Broken Wing's stoic features. "He should remain hidden until necessary." Joseph agrees, but says the boy is determined. "Apparently he's been practicing what he'll say to the judge." Henderson smiled faintly. "Joseph says he's become quite the speaker." As they talked, a commotion outside drew their attention. Through the small cell window, they glimpsed cavalry uniforms. A patrol of 6 soldiers led by a captain had ridden into town. "That's unexpected," Henderson frowned. "Military presence at a civilian trial." The front door opened, and Sheriff Miller entered with the cavalry officer. Captain James Porter removed his hat, revealing a young face weathered by frontier service. "Doctor," Miller nodded curtly. "The captain needs to speak with the prisoner." Henderson gathered his medical bag. "I'll be at the hearing, Broken Wing." After the doctor departed, Captain Porter approached the cell. Unlike Edwards or Miller, his manner was professional rather than hostile. "You are the Apache called Broken Wing?" "I am." Porter produced a folded document from his uniform pocket. "I have orders regarding your case from Fort Laramie. The military has interest in maintaining peaceful relations with remaining free Apache bands. My actions were my own, Broken Wing stated. My people had no part in them. Nevertheless, there are concerns this incident could spark wider tensions. Porter unfolded the paper. I'm instructed to observe the proceedings and ensure fair treatment under territorial law. Sheriff Miller scoffed. Since when does the Army care about Indian rights? Since 3 settlements were raided last summer, after a similar incident in the Dakota Territory. Porter replied evenly. He turned back to Broken Wing. I'm also authorized to offer protective custody if necessary. Meaning, Broken Wing asked. Meaning the fort might be safer than this jail if local sentiments turn excessive. Miller bristled. We maintain order in redemption, Captain. Of course, Sheriff. Porter refolded his orders. I'm merely following instructions. After they left, Broken Wing returned to the window. The street had grown more crowded, the divisions more apparent. Blue ribbons dotted one group, while Edwards's supporters congregated near the saloon. A wagon arrived carrying Reverend Phillips and several church elders. Most surprising was the small gathering of Apache and mixed-blood settlers who had appeared at the edge of town, Joseph's doing no doubt. Their presence added another dimension to the growing drama. From his coat, Broken Wing withdrew a small object he had kept concealed from his jailers, a polished eagle feather wrapped in sinew at its base. Morning Star had pressed it into his hand before he departed, explaining its significance. Tufa's feather, she had said, from my father, a respected elder. When truth must be told, hold this and the ancestor spirits will guide your words. Broken Wing turned the feather slowly in his hands. He had entered white man's justice system willingly, but would carry his own traditions into their courtroom. Tomorrow he would speak for Thomas, for the other children, and for a principle both cultures claimed to value, that the innocent deserved protection, regardless of who offered it. The courthouse, normally reserved for monthly property disputes and occasional drunken disorderly hearings, had been hastily prepared for a trial of unprecedented significance. Judge Wallace inspected the arrangements with a critical eye, noting the newly swept floors and freshly oiled furniture. This will suffice, he told the nervous clerk. Ensure adequate seating for all interested parties. There's considerable interest, Your Honor, the clerk admitted. More than the room can hold. Then we'll use the church for the main hearing, Wallace decided. More appropriate anyway, given the moral questions at hand. The judge settled at the makeshift desk to review the case files one final time. Despite Edwards's influence and the sheriff's insistence on a simple kidnapping charge, Wallace recognized the complexity beneath. The petition regarding child welfare practices raised legitimate concerns that couldn't be dismissed. A knock interrupted his concentration. Enter. Miss Clayton appeared, her usual schoolteacher composure bolstered by the silver medallion of the Child Welfare Commission now pinned to her shawl. Your Honor, I brought the documentation you requested. She placed a leather portfolio on his desk. Inside were meticulously organized papers, medical records from Dr. Henderson, school attendance logs, and sworn statements from townspeople regarding the treatment of orphaned children in redemption. Most thorough, Miss Clayton, Wallace acknowledged, leafing through the paper. You've prepared as if for a full commission inquiry. Because that's what this should be, Your Honor, she replied steadily. Broken Wing's case is merely the visible peak of a much deeper problem. Wallace studied her with newfound respect. You surprise me, Miss Clayton. When the governor appointed you deputy commissioner, I assumed it was a political gesture. I take my responsibilities seriously, sir. These children deserve nothing less. After she departed, Wallace examined a particularly troubling document, Henderson's medical journal, with entries spanning 3 years documenting injuries to children in Edwards's care. The pattern was difficult to dismiss as mere childhood accidents. Meanwhile, in the jailhouse, Broken Wing received another visitor. Joseph Blackthorne entered, escorted by a deputy who clearly disapproved of allowing the half-breed trapper access to the prisoner. Leave us, Joseph told the deputy firmly. When they were alone, he spoke in low tones. Thomas is safe with Morningstar's cousin at the edge of town. Boys determined to testify. It could be dangerous, Broken Wing cautioned. Try telling him that. Joseph smiled. Says he's Apache now and not afraid of anything. Despite his concern, Broken Wing felt a surge of pride. He has learned quickly. Too quickly, perhaps. Joseph glanced toward the door to ensure they weren't overheard. There's something else. Word spread among the local bands. Several elders have come to observe the trial. This was unexpected news. They should not involve themselves. They're not here to interfere, Joseph explained. But what happens to you matters to them. An Apache being given fair treatment in white man's court would be unprecedented. Their conversation was interrupted by Sarah Jensen, who entered carrying a bundle of clean clothing. For the hearing, she explained, passing it through the bars. You should look respectable. Broken Wing accepted the simple but dignified shirt and trousers with a nod of thanks. Judge Wallace has agreed to let you speak, Sarah continued. Edwards tried to prevent it, but the judge cited territorial statutes that allow defendants to address the court directly. The ribbon campaign is working, Joseph added. Half the town's wearing them now, and the other half? Broken Wing asked. Sarah's expression tightened. Edwards has been buying drinks all day, stirring up sentiment against you. There's talk of not accepting the judge's ruling if it goes against them. The captain's concerned enough that he's positioned soldiers around the church, Joseph said, calling it maintaining order. But it's protection, plain and simple. As they discussed final preparations, a small object fell from the bundle of clothing Sarah had brought. Broken Wing picked it up, a child's drawing on a scrap of brown paper. In crude but heartfelt strokes, Thomas had depicted two figures standing together, one tall with long hair, one small holding what appeared to be a knife or stick. Above them, written in careful, unpracticed letters, Broken Wing and Thomas. He insisted I bring it, Sarah explained, watching Broken Wing's face soften almost imperceptibly. Said it would give you strength. Broken Wing carefully tucked the drawing into his shirt. It does. When Sarah and Joseph had gone, Broken Wing changed into the clean clothes, mentally preparing for war lay ahead. The simple drawing remained close to his heart, a tangible reminder of what he was fighting for. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows as townspeople began gathering for the evening hearing. Judge Wallace had decided to begin proceedings immediately, rather than wait for morning, concerned that tensions would only increase overnight. Sheriff Miller appeared at the cell. Time to go, Indian. Judge is ready. As Broken Wing was led through town toward the church, he observed the divided crowds. Many wore Sarah's blue ribbons. Others glared with open hostility. Between them stood Captain Porter's soldiers, maintaining an uneasy buffer. At the church steps, Broken Wing paused, looking toward the eastern edge of town where Thomas waited with Morningstar's relatives. Though invisible from this distance, he felt the boy's presence, a small but unbreakable connection that had somehow become the center of a storm engulfing an entire community. Keep moving, Miller ordered, but without his usual harshness. Even the sheriff seemed to recognize that something larger than a simple kidnapping case would be decided tonight. Broken Wing straightened his shoulders and entered the church to face whatever justice awaited. The church had never been so crowded. Pews meant for Sunday worship now held spectators to territorial justice. Judge Wallace presided from behind the pulpit, the territorial seal hastily mounted on the wall behind him. To one side sat Edwards with his lawyer, a sharp-featured man named Hargrove brought in from the county seat. On the other side stood Broken Wing, alone but dignified. This court is now in session, Wallace announced, his resonant voice filling the space. We are here to determine the facts in the matter of Jackson Edwards versus the Apache man known as Broken Wing, concerning the alleged kidnapping of the minor child Thomas, surname unknown. The judge surveyed the packed church. Given the unusual nature of this case, and its importance to this community, I have decided to conduct these proceedings in public view rather than closed chambers. Hargrove rose immediately. Your Honor, my client objects. This is a straightforward criminal matter that should be handled according to standard procedures. Nothing about this case appears straightforward, Counselor, Wallace replied dryly. The petition before me raises significant questions about the welfare of orphaned children in redemption, directly pertinent to the defendant's actions. From his seat, Edwards glared at Broken Wing, who maintained his composed stance, eyes forward. Mr. Hargrove, you may present your case first, Wallace directed. The lawyer approached the front of the church. Your Honor, the facts are simple. On the 15th of this month, this Indian took a white child from his legal employer without permission. Under territorial statute, that constitutes kidnapping, regardless of claimed motivation. Hargrove detailed Edwards's legal relationship to Thomas, a debt servitude arrangement following his father's death, and emphasized the dangerous precedent of allowing a non-citizen to interfere with lawful contracts. Edwards has invested considerably in the boy's upkeep, providing food, shelter, and useful employment. The defendant had no legal standing to remove the child from this arrangement. When Hargrove finished, Judge Wallace turned to Broken Wing. The court recognizes that you have no legal representation. You may speak in your own defense. Broken Wing moved forward, his moccasins silent on the wooden floor. From his shirt, he withdrew the eagle feather Morning Star had given him, holding it at his side. I took Thomas from men who threw him in the dirt for amusement, he began, his accented English carrying clearly through the church. I claimed him according to Apache tradition because your law had failed to protect him. A murmur ran through the crowd. Broken Wing continued. I did not steal a servant. I rescued a child from harm. Objection, Hargrove interrupted. The defendant is making unsubstantiated allegations of mistreatment. I believe we have substantial documentation on that point, Wallace responded, indicating the portfolio Miss Clayton had provided. Proceed, Broken Wing. Among my people, children are sacred. They belong to the future, not to men who lost gambling debts. Broken Wing's gaze swept the room. I have broken your law to uphold a higher one that both our peoples claim to honor, that the helpless must be protected. Judge Wallace leaned forward. You admit to taking the boy? I admit to saving him, Broken Wing corrected. And I would do so again. Edwards whispered urgently to Hargrove, who then requested permission to call witnesses. The judge agreed, and Fletcher, one of the railroad workers who had tormented Thomas, took the stand. He threatened us, Fletcher claimed. Acted like he owned the boy, intimidated everyone with that knife he carries. Did you witness the defendant physically warm anyone? Wallace asked. Well, no, and why were you involved in this situation to begin with? Fletcher shifted uncomfortably. Was just having some fun with the kid. What kind of fun? Wallace pressed. Before Fletcher could answer, the church door burst open. Sheriff Miller entered, firmly gripping the arm of a small figure. Thomas found him sneaking around back of the church. Your Honor, Miller announced. Thought you'd want to know the missing boy's been located. A collective gasp rose from the spectators. Thomas's eyes darted frantically until they found Broken Wing. The warrior's expression remained controlled, but his hand tightened on the eagle feather. While Judge Wallace said, recovering from the surprise, this certainly simplifies matters. Bring the boy forward. As Thomas was led to the front, Dr. Henderson quickly approached the judge. Your Honor, as the boy's physician, I request he not be immediately returned to Mr. Edwards until his condition can be evaluated. Reasonable precaution, Wallace agreed. Sheriff, release the boy to Dr. Henderson's custody for now. Edwards rose in protest. That boy is my property by right of his father's debt. The word property hung in the air, its callousness silencing the room. Even Edwards's supporters seemed uncomfortable with the declaration. Thomas, standing beside Dr. Henderson, suddenly pulled free and ran directly to Broken Wing. Before anyone could stop him, he wrapped his arms around the warrior's waist. I ain't going back, he declared, loud enough for all to hear. He saved me. Broken Wing placed a protective hand on the boy's shoulder, the eagle feather still clutched in his other hand. The simple gesture of guardianship spoke more eloquently than any legal argument. Judge Wallace observed this tableau for a long moment. "I believe," he said slowly, "that we have just witnessed the most pertinent testimony possible in this case." To Hargrove's visible frustration, the judge continued, "This court will hear from the boy directly. Thomas, are you willing to tell us what happened?" Thomas nodded, still pressed against Broken Wing's side. "Then tomorrow morning we will reconvene to hear his account," Wallace decided. "Until then, Dr. Henderson will maintain temporary custody of the child." As the crowd began to disperse, Thomas looked up at Broken Wing. "I came like I promised," he whispered. "I ain't afraid." For the first time since his arrest, Broken Wing allowed himself a small smile. "I know, little warrior, I know." Morning light filtered through the church's stained glass windows, casting colored patterns across the assembled crowd. Even more townspeople had gathered for the second day of proceedings, drawn by news of Thomas's dramatic appearance. The boy sat in a chair beside Judge Wallace, small legs dangling above the floor. Henderson had dressed him in clean clothes, and his hair remained in the neat braid Morningstar had fashioned. Despite his obvious nervousness, Thomas sat straight-backed, occasionally glancing at Broken Wing for reassurance. "Thomas," Judge Wallace began gently, "do you understand why you're here today?" "Yes, sir," the boy replied. "To tell the truth about what happened." "That's right. And do you understand what the truth means?" Thomas nodded solemnly. "It means saying what really happened, not what someone wants you to say." "Very good." Wallace leaned forward. "Can you tell us how you came to be with Mr. Edwards at the saloon?" Thomas's small hands gripped the edges of his chair. "My pa died when I was little. Mr. Edwards said pa owed him money for gambling, so I had to work it off." "What kind of work did you do?" "Cleaned spittoons, swept floors, carried drinks." Thomas's voice grew quieter. "Sometimes the men would use me for games." "Games?" Wallace prompted. "What sort of games?" Thomas stared at his feet. "They'd make bets about me, how many glasses I could carry without dropping, how long I could stand on one foot, if I'd cry when they—" He trailed off. "When they what, Thomas?" "When they hurt me," he whispered. A murmur ran through the church. Edwards shifted uncomfortably as several gazes turned his way. "Did Mr. Edwards know about these games?" Wallace asked. "He started most of them," Thomas replied. "Said it was good business." From the spectators came a woman's stifled sob. Sarah Jensen sat with her hand pressed to her mouth, tears tracking silently down her cheeks. "Now, Thomas," Wallace continued, "can you tell us what happened the day Broken Wing took you away?" Thomas straightened, finding his voice again. "They threw me in the dirt for a bet. Then Broken Wing came and said they couldn't do that anymore. He put his medicine pouch on me and said I was under his protection." "Were you afraid of him?" Thomas shook his head emphatically. "No, sir. I was afraid of going back to the saloon." "And how has Broken Wing treated you?" "He gave me food, taught me things." Thomas's face brightened. "How to make fire and follow tracks. How to play the flute. He never hit me, not once." Judge Wallace nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you, Thomas. You've been very brave." Edwards's lawyer rose for cross-examination, his approach noticeably gentler than the previous day. "Thomas, isn't it true that you had food and shelter at Mr. Edwards's establishment? Things many orphans don't have." "Yes, sir," Thomas admitted. And isn't it also true that work is expected of all children in frontier communities? Chores are normal for boys your age." "Yes, but most boys don't get burned with cigars when they spill things," Thomas replied with unexpected clarity. Hargrove faltered at this direct response. From the gallery, Dr. Henderson stood. "Your Honor, I can confirm treatment consistent with the boy's statement. My medical records document multiple suspicious injuries." "Those records are already in evidence, Doctor," Wallace acknowledged. "Please be seated." As the questioning continued, Captain Porter entered the church and approached the judge, handing him a sealed document. Wallace read it with raised eyebrows before addressing the court. "I've received orders from the territorial governor regarding this case," he announced. "In light of growing public interest, he has instructed me to consider the broader implications for child welfare throughout the territory." Edwards whispered furiously to Hargrove, who requested a recess to review this development. Judge Wallace agreed, calling a 1-hour adjournment. As spectators filed outside, Reverend Phillips approached the bench, From beneath his coat, he withdrew a weathered leather document, its edges cracked with age. Your Honor, I believe this may be relevant to your deliberations. Wallace examined the offering. The original town charter, yes, sir, Phillips confirmed, established when Redemption was founded 15 years ago. I found it in the church archives last night. The judge opened it carefully, scanning the faded handwriting. Interesting, particularly Article 4. That's what I thought, Your Honor. When court reconvened, Wallace placed the charter on the pulpit before him. Before we continue with testimony, I wish to read into the record a section from Redemption's founding document. He cleared his throat and began Article 4. This settlement, being founded by those who have known persecution and hardship, shall maintain as its primary virtue the protection of the vulnerable. No child within its boundaries shall suffer want or mistreatment, and all citizens shall consider the welfare of orphans and widows a sacred trust. A heavy silence followed this reading. Many townspeople appeared surprised, as if hearing these principles for the first time. It seems, Wallace observed dryly, that Redemption was established with values it has since forgotten. Edwards rose angrily. A piece of paper from 15 years ago doesn't change the law, Judge. The boy is legally bound to me. Is he? Wallace held up the chart. Because according to your town's own founding principles, no arrangement that results in mistreatment of a child can be considered valid. He turned to Broken Wing. It appears, sir, that your actions, while unorthodox, may have been more in keeping with the original spirit of Redemption than those who claim to uphold its laws. The church remained silent as Judge Wallace prepared to deliver his ruling. Thomas had been permitted to sit beside Broken Wing, the warrior's steady hand resting protectively on the boy's shoulder. Edwards and his lawyer conferred in urgent whispers, their earlier confidence visibly diminished. Before I render judgment, Wallace began, are there any final statements from either party? Edwards's lawyer rose. Your Honor, while we acknowledge the boy's testimony is compelling, we maintain that legal principles must prevail over emotional considerations. Edwards held legitimate claim to the boy's service through his father's debt, a practice recognized throughout the territory. The judge nodded. And you, Broken Wing? The Apache stood, his dignity undiminished by the proceedings. I have broken your written law to uphold a higher one that lives in all human hearts. If that demands punishment, I accept it. But the boy must remain free. Wallace considered these final words, then straightened the papers before him. This case has presented this court with a fundamental question. When do universal moral principles supersede the letter of territorial law? He lifted the child welfare petition. The evidence presented by Miss Clayton and Doc Henderson establishes a pattern of mistreatment that no civilized society should tolerate, regardless of legal technicalities. Edwards began to protest, but Wallace silenced him with a raised hand. Mr. Edwards, your claim to the boy rests on a debt agreement with a deceased man. An agreement Thomas had no part in creating. While debt servitude has legal precedent, it was never intended to place children in situations of documented abuse. The judge picked up the town chart. Furthermore, this document reminds us that Redemption was founded upon principles its citizens would do well to remember. Taking a deep breath, Wallace delivered his judgment. This court finds that Broken Wing acted not with criminal intent but with moral necessity when removing Thomas from a harmful situation. The kidnapping charge is therefore dismissed. A collective gasp rose from the assembly, followed by scattered applause from those wearing blue ribbons. However, Wallace continued, silencing the room, we cannot have individuals taking the law into their own hands, regardless of motivation. Therefore, I am ordering Broken Wing to perform 6 months of community service, assisting in the establishment of a proper orphanage for Redemption. The judge turned to Edwards. As for you, Mr. Edwards, this court finds your treatment of Thomas and potentially other children to be in violation of both territorial statutes and basic human decency. You are hereby fined $500 to be directed toward the orphanage's creation. Edwards's face darkened with fury. This is outrageous. I'll appeal to the Territorial Supreme Court. That is your right, Wallace acknowledged calmly. But be advised that the governor's office has taken special interest in this case. I doubt you'll find a more sympathetic hearing there, particularly as this ruling will be accompanied by Miss Clayton's complete report on child welfare conditions in your establishment. Wallace turned to Sheriff Miller. Sheriff, you are instructed to conduct a full investigation into the treatment of all orphaned or indentured children in Redemption, with findings to be reported directly to the Territorial Child Welfare Commission. Miller nodded uncomfortably, avoiding Edwards's glare. Finally, Wallace continued, regarding Thomas's guardianship. The boy pressed closer to Broken Wing, fear returning to his eyes. From his desk, Wallace produced a formal document, its heading embossed with the territorial seal. In recognition of the extraordinary circumstances of this case, and with the authority vested in me by the territorial governor, I am issuing this special guardianship decree. He held up the document for all to see. It establishes Broken Wing as Thomas's legal guardian, with certain conditions, that Thomas receive proper education, medical care, and that his welfare be monitored quarterly by appointed representatives of the Child Welfare Commission. Thomas's face transformed with joy. He looked up at Broken Wing, who maintained his composure despite the emotion visible in his eye. This arrangement, Wallace added, will serve as a model for a new territorial policy regarding cross-cultural guardianship, a precedent that recognizes character and capability over arbitrary distinctions of race or origin. The judge signed the document with flourish, then handed it to his clerk. This court is adjourned. As spectators began to disperse, some celebrating, others grumbling in dissatisfaction, Captain Porter approached Broken Wing. "That was unexpected," the officer commented. "First time I've seen an Indian win in white man's court." "I did not win," Broken Wing replied. "Justice did." Thomas, unable to contain his excitement, tugged at Broken Wing's sleeve. "Does this mean I can stay with you? For real?"
Yes?
Broken Wing confirmed, finally allowing a small smile. "For real?" Sarah Jensen joined them, eyes bright with unshed tears. "The judge's ruling changes everything, not just for you two, but for all the children." She handed Broken Wing the guardianship decree, its official seal and ribbons formalizing what his heart had already decided weeks ago at the edge of town, that this small, resilient boy was now his responsibility. "It is a good beginning," Broken Wing acknowledged, carefully rolling the document. "But only a beginning." Outside, the divided town of Redemption faced its own new beginning, one that would require reconciling long-held practices with newly awakened conscience. For better or worse, a single Apache warrior's act of defiance had forced them to confront the gap between their professed values and their lived reality. Summer had given way to autumn by the time the changes in Redemption became visible to casual observers. The most obvious stood at the edge of town, a sturdy wooden structure with a sign reading Redemption Children's Home. Its wide porch already hosted a collection of rocking chairs where Sarah Jensen often sat with her young charges. On this particular afternoon, Broken Wing measured wooden planks for bookshelves while Thomas handed him nails with newfound confidence. The boy had thrived in the months since the trial, his thin frame filling out, his eyes losing their haunted wariness. "Miss Clayton says I'm catching up fast with my letters," Thomas announced, carefully sorting nails by size. "Says I might be ready for proper school books by winter." "Good," Broken Wing nodded. "Education is important for your future." The orphanage represented Judge Wallace's vision realized through community effort. Even those who had opposed Broken Wing during the trial had gradually contributed, some from genuine change of heart, others from pragmatic recognition that Redemption's reputation needed rehabilitation. Sheriff Miller approached, his relationship with Broken Wing having evolved into an uneasy respect. "Shelves coming along? They will be finished by sunset." Broken Wing replied. Miller nodded, still uncomfortable with direct conversation. "Got word from the territorial capital. Governor's appointed a permanent child welfare commission. Miss Clayton's been named full commissioner for our county. She will do well," Broken Wing observed. "She understands children's needs." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Joseph and Morning Star, who visited regularly from their mountain home. Morning Star immediately engaged Thomas in rapid Apache conversation, the boy's grasp of her language improving weekly under her tutelage. "Boy's becoming a proper translator," Joseph commented. "Moves between worlds better than most adults." Miller watched this exchange with lingering discomfort, but kept his peace. The territorial ruling had forced accommodation, if not full acceptance of such cultural blending. Across town, changes were evident in other ways. Edwards had sold the Red Stallion to a businessman from Denver, who renamed it the Frontier Hotel and removed the gambling tables. Edwards himself had departed for California, his influence diminished by both the fine and the public testimony against him. Dr. Henderson emerged from the orphanage, medical bag in hand. "Lucy's fever has broken," he reported to Sarah. "She should be up and about tomorrow." Lucy Simmons had been among the first children relocated after the trial. Her transition from saloon drudge to orphanage resident, marked by both physical and emotional healing. "She's been asking about joining Thomas's reading lessons," Sarah said. "Seems determined to catch up." Speaking of determination, Henderson nodded toward the road, where Reverend Phillips approached with several church elders. The Reverend's Sunday sermons had transformed since the trial, focusing increasingly on practical charity rather than abstract theology. His congregation had grown accordingly. "We've brought the blankets for winter," Phillips announced, and the council approved funds for a proper heating stove. As the adults discussed practical matters, Thomas slipped away to join several other children playing in the yard. Their game, a mixture of settler tag and Apache tracking exercises, reflected the unique education they were receiving. Later, as sunset painted the distant mountains gold, Broken Wing and Thomas walked to their small cabin built alongside the orphanage. The arrangement satisfied both the judge's requirement for monitoring and their need for privacy. At the door, Thomas paused, pointing eastward. "Someone's coming." Broken Wing smiled slightly at the boy's developing observation skills. "Yes, 2 riders." The approaching figures resolved into Captain Porter and a uniformed cavalry lieutenant. They dismounted at a respectful distance. "Broken Wing," Porter greeted. "Thomas, we're surveying the region for the War Department. Thought you should know there's talk of establishing a permanent Indian agent's office in Redemption." "To watch us?" Broken Wing asked directly. "Partly," Porter admitted, "but also to ensure fair treatment. The territorial governor was impressed by Judge Wallace's handling of your case, wants to build on it." After the soldiers departed, Thomas helped Broken Wing prepare their evening meal. The boy had developed his own routines, blending tasks he'd learned from Morning Star with habits from his previous life. From a small carved box on their table, Thomas removed the day's most precious object, a simple red apple, given to him by Miss Clayton for excellent work on his letters. With solemn ceremony, he cut it precisely in half, offering the larger portion to Broken Wing. "From me to you," he said in Apache, using the formal phrasing Morning Star had taught him. Broken Wing accepted, with equal formality. "I am honored by your sharing." They ate in companionable silence as twilight deepened around their cabin. Beyond the window, Redemption settled into evening rhythms, changed imperfect, but nudged toward its better nature by one man's refusal to ignore injustice. "Tomorrow's my birthday," Thomas said suddenly. "At least, Miss Clayton thinks so from the church record." "We should celebrate properly," Broken Wing nodded. "Perhaps invite Joseph and Morning Star. And Sarah and Dr. Henderson," Thomas added. "That would be like," he hesitated, searching for the right word. "Family," Broken Wing supplied quietly. "Yeah." Thomas smiled, the words settling comfortably between them. "Family." In the distance, the church bell rang, marking the day's end. Its sound carried across a town that bore the same name but no longer resembled Redemption, where a boy had once been thrown into the street for a drunken bet, a small victory perhaps, in the larger struggles of the changing frontier, but significant to those who had lived it.